Now, I would like to, at this point, talk about Mad Sweeney. I realized while I was putting all this together that, we're getting the stories from Ruben and Lisa and our guests that are coming up later, which would be Terry and Jim, and all the previous guests that we've had, Tim and Lance and Jane, and I don't want to try to name everybody because I'll miss somebody, but all of our guests have given their experiences and stories, but I haven't really given my complete story on the air of Cult Free Radio. Before I started, I did kind of put together a little Who is Mad Sweeney, which is a brief introduction, and I've clipped some of that I'd like to play this evening for the audience. And then when that's finished, I'd like to continue with that and speak live a little bit about where I'm coming from and where I'm at this point. So I guess we might consider this next portion a self-interview with Mad Sweeney. For over 40 years, I was one of Jehovah's Witnesses, and for approximately 3 years, a little bit more perhaps now, I've been sort of working my way free from that organization. I feel like I'm completely out, but I do have some family members that are still in the Jehovah's Witnesses, and so I still have some sort of connection to that religious organization. So why did I want to do Cult Free Radio on Ustream? Well, I've been very active over the last few years, participating in online internet message boards, somewhat on Facebook, and there's so many good conversations through that medium that are happening via text and that are preserved, archived for basically all time or for as long as the internet lasts. But I felt like it might be a good opportunity for some of us who are on these message boards or who have friended one another through Facebook to hear each other speak in a sort of live, extemporaneous format where we can talk about some of the same things that we talk about on the message board, but rather than wait for a reply hours or days later, we can get a nice good thread, so to speak, discussed in a matter of an hour or two. So I've also noticed that nobody else is really doing this yet, and I thought it was something that kind of needs to be done. There needs to be some sort of way for former members of high-control religious groups, current members who are sort of questioning and looking for something, information of this sort, and potential recruits so that they can learn what these high-control religious groups, what a lot of people call cults, are all about, how they operate, and what they do to and for their recruits and members. So something live as opposed to on a message board or on Facebook I thought would be helpful, educational, encouraging to those of us who are in a similar situation. And I thought it might be fun, and so far so good. I've only been doing this a few minutes actually, but I'm having a pretty good time. But why me? Why Mad Sweeney? What makes me qualified to do this show? Well, because I live in a free society and I have broken free from a high-control cult or organization, I can. I have a computer with broadband connection. I have a microphone. I actually have a camera too, but you don't want to look at me for 2 hours, believe me. And so I can speak to this topic. I also have some personal experience as a member for over 4 decades, being raised in the Jehovah's Witness organization. Also, I've worked really hard myself the last few years educating myself. I've taken classes at the university on psychology, sociology. I read as much as I can, surfing the internet and books, viewed videos online, and I can recommend some too. On YouTube, you might want to Google or search for Milgram's, Milgrams, Obedience to Authority Experiment. Or you might want to look at Ash's Conformity Experience, and Ash is spelled A-S-H-E. Or Zimbardo's Stanford Prison Experiments. Or you might want to go on, look for TED Talks. Catherine Schultz recently gave a talk on being wrong. That's the title. And so there's lots of YouTube out there that can educate you on psychology, group dynamics, principles of obedience to authority, especially that can apply to religious cults. Conformity is used a lot by religious cults. And a reluctance to be wrong. So those videos that I mentioned might be good. I'll try to document them in text somewhere. If not on Ustream, then I'll definitely do it on Facebook, because I know you can't be sitting there writing down, dictating everything I'm saying, and some of these names you may not have gotten the same spelling. But anyway, those are some videos that I really liked and enjoyed and I thought were educational that I saw online. Also books such as Influence, The Psychology of Persuasion. That book is a psychology book written more focused on business, sales, how people persuade one another as far as getting clients. The principles of psychology in that book are no different for religious organizations than they are for somebody who's trying to sell you a vacuum. Sell you a Bible, sell you their organization. It's all the same deal. Another great book on cognitive dissonance, justification, confirmation bias, things such as that, is called Mistakes Were Made, But Not By Me. Another great book that helps members and former cult members to see how these high control organizations operate and operate in the same way is Combating Cult Mind Control by Steve Hassan. I've also read Age of Reason, Thomas Paine, Crisis of Conscience by Raymond Franz, Captives of a Concept by Don Cameron, In Search of Christian Freedom, also by Raymond Franz, and I'm working on right now reading Teaching Your Child How to Think, which is about educating our kids and ourselves on critical thinking as opposed to just buying everything that's sold to us. So, from all that sort of reading and taking classes over the last couple years and watching YouTubes and all that kind of thing, I feel like I've learned more about the psychology that's used by these high control organizations, either religious or business. They're all similar. And looking back at my own personal experience as a member, I find that they violate what I consider some of the most basic of psychological human rights. And those are the right to complete and truthful information, the right to think and analyze that information autonomously, without pressure, the right to feel whatever emotions one feels without repercussions or threats, without guilt or fear, and the right to choose one's own behaviors based upon thoughtful analysis of that complete and truthful information, in a way that can produce for ourselves real positive feelings of joy, love, friendship. And these are things that high control religious groups take away from people or manipulate so that people believe that they have, but they actually don't. And so this is what I'd like to talk about on our first show, which is, again, coming up Saturday night, April 30th, 10 p.m. Eastern Time. And I hope everybody will enjoy it. I hope enough people will participate so that you don't have to listen to my voice for a couple hours straight. We can have a conversation as opposed to a monologue. I think we're going to really have a good time. I know it can be sort of a drag sometimes to talk about the problems that we've been through, the things we've experienced in the past. But I think also seeing that we're not unique in one particular organization. Jehovah's Witnesses are not unique. And that our own personal situation is not unique. Each of us have gone through many similar things. And then in another way, we are all unique in a way. So we can share both our similarities, our differences, and we'll come out of this weekend hopefully much stronger for it, able to face the future, because freeing ourselves from these sorts of organizations, it really it sets us up for a better future, a future that we can enjoy real relationships that we know are genuine, based on information that we know we've seen and learned all sides of the issue, and that we've been allowed to think and feel the way that we want to think and feel about this information that we receive, and that we can choose how we're going to live our lives from today on and every day. Well, that was a clip from the introduction I did back in April, and one thing I noticed when I listened to it again was that it was an introduction to the Mad Sweeney of cult-free radio, but it kind of glossed over a lot of who Mad Sweeney the person is. I gave a little bit of my background as a witness, but I feel like I get questions and there's more to say. And so, for instance, people ask, why Mad Sweeney if that's not your real name? Where did that come from? Well, I've been participating in internet message boards for quite a long time, actually since before there were internet message boards, back when there were text-based Usenet news groups. There was a thing called roundtable discussions on Genie, which was a General Electric sort of internet service. And as internet usage grew and became popular in the mid to late 90s, security became an issue for people participating online. And like most people online at the time, we figured out that it's probably not a good idea to use your own name. And so, being a fan of science fiction and fantasy, as I mentioned in the social stream, I was a Jehovah's Witness. I didn't read nonfiction. I read basically all fiction, as including The Watchtower and The Awake magazine. So, as a fan of science fiction and fantasy, I tended to pick character names from some of my favorite books, shows, and movies. And this was before The Watchtower really came out strongly against online associations. They're always about 5 to 10 years behind the curve of things, and sometimes even longer. But there were a lot of witnesses going online at the time, some to talk religion and defend their faith, and but I was just more interested in sports and science fiction groups, and so I rarely got into religious discussions at the time. And so at that time I would go by different characters, the Dread Pirate Roberts or the Marquis de Carabas, or different characters from books I've read. And Mad Sweeney, in addition to be a legendary Irish king who went crazy, he's also a character from the Neil Gaiman novel American Gods, which, by the way, may become an HBO miniseries within the next year or two. And this character is a tall, skinny, leprechaun-type figure who ends up drinking himself to death because nobody believes in him anymore. And basically he's the opposite of the real me, who's a short, chubby, American-type figure who doesn't drink at all anymore because I've learned to believe in myself. And so I always go with the science fiction or fantasy-type character, and in a lot of places online I am the Dread Pirate Roberts. But for the sake of keeping my cult-free religious life separate from the rest of my life, especially online and off, you won't see Mad Sweeney on a NFL site or a NCAA hockey discussion board or on any of the science fiction boards. I'm still there, but under those other names. And so for religious and cult-free discussions, in addition to cult-free radio, I participate a lot, as most of you know, on Jehovah'sWitness.net. I'm increasingly participating in some Facebook groups like the one Ruben mentioned, Ex-Jehovah's Witness Recovery 3, also The End is Nigh, but this time we really mean it. Also, I've contributed to www.xjw.com. There's a dash in there, x-jw.com. And so I'm pretty busy online with that kind of stuff. There's also a group for Cult-Free Radio on Facebook as well. Now, when I was just a toddler, as I mentioned in the recorded part, I was 2 years old when my mom started studying, or at least became a return visit. And my sister was already a witness at the time and was trying to take me to meetings and trying to get Mom to go as well. And so, before long, Mom was studying the Truth Book, and she was baptized at the district convention in 1975. So I was basically raised a Jehovah's Witness. And like most Jehovah's Witnesses who grew up in the organization, I got married young, but I was very, very lucky. My wife is somebody I am happy to spend the rest of my life with, and so many of my witness friends who I grew up with are either already divorced or they are stuck in marriages they're unhappy with because they just don't have one of the excuses or reasons that the Watchtower allows for divorce. There are a few happily married witness friends that I've grown up with as well, but there are a lot who are not. So I'm very thankful for my wife and the marriage I have. Now, while I was a witness, I progressed pretty slowly compared to a lot of brothers, and I think it was because of a couple things, and one of them was that I was way too honest for my own good. You know, I would never go around saying things that I didn't mean, like a lot of guys did, like, I really wish I could pioneer and go to Bethel. I've been praying about it. I wouldn't say those things just to make myself look more spiritual than the people around me. And I never really had interest in either of those things that would have put me on the fast track for becoming an elder. Now, I've known kids who in their mid-20s were appointed as elders because of their pioneering and spending a few years in Bethel service. But I took a slow, steady pace, knowing that that kid who was appointed in his 20s would probably be burned out and stepping down by the time I even got appointed. So eventually, in my late 30s, I became a ministerial servant, and I quickly started getting assignments like public talks and the Watchtower conductor for the small foreign language group my family was in. And I put in a lot of time, a lot of energy, a lot of gas money traveling all over the place to give talks and trying to convince others there to come to our little neck of the woods to give talks too. You know, it was kind of fun for me. I enjoyed that a lot more than I enjoyed going out in field service. But if I had stayed, I was on track for probably becoming an elder at some point, since I had been conducting the Watchtower and giving public talks and those sorts of things. But then something happened. Something, just as I was getting my feet under me as a ministerial servant, something happened to open my mind that the people running the organization were basically delusional. As somebody raised as a Jehovah's Witness, I knew there were times when guys who were relative dopes from the perspective of the real world would work the system and manage to get appointed as elders. But I felt like most Jehovah's Witnesses feel that they were the exception rather than the rule, and that Jehovah would work it out in his own due time. What I didn't know was that delusional thoughts and ideas originated with the organization itself. And here's how I found out. I always had a really good sort of personal relationship with the men on the body of elders, basically because they were mostly my peers. Some were a little bit older, some were somewhat younger, and we were all men of equal status, or so I thought. Now, there came a point where there was an internal decision that the body of elders made that was going to be detrimental to the foreign language group I was working with. And it was going to also create a ton of extra work for me personally. And so, being with the guys, my friends, I complained out loud verbally about it, thinking, my gripe has merit, and knowing that most of the elders on the body didn't really have a clue about the impact that their particular decision was going to have. So I complained out loud. I didn't think too much of it, and I thought, well, that was that. Well, a couple of weeks later, the presiding overseer, which they were still called at the time, asked me to meet with him and another elder to discuss some of the concerns he heard I was having. Well, great. I thought, all right, somebody's actually listening to me and going to do something about this. Well, that little bit of optimism was short-lived, because the meeting with the elders ended up consisting of counsel on pride, counsel on questioning, counsel on obedience, and it culminated with the presiding overseer applying Revelation chapter 1, verse 20, which is the scripture where Christ is said to hold the stars in his right hand. They applied that to themselves as those stars. And he said that according to Watchtower doctrine, and I checked later to make sure that the elders weren't making it up, questioning a decision by a body of elders is equal to challenging the authority of Jesus Christ himself. Well, there was no arguing with that kind of lunacy. I knew these guys. They had no special insight, and especially no specific insight into this foreign language stuff. They weren't representing Jesus in this prideful viewpoint they had. They were just using that as an excuse so they wouldn't have to rethink their decision and perhaps admit that they were wrong and that a lowly ministerial servant was correct. So from that day on, I didn't take anything said by any of the organization leadership at face value anymore. Because really, how can you tell a human being not to think, not to ask questions, and then expect him to remain compliant and obedient and still be content at the same time? I mean, it obviously works on millions of people, but this specific thing was what kind of broke the spell over me, so that I no longer felt that it would be wrong to research and explore outside of the organization literature. Because at that point, I knew that the leadership was a fraud hiding behind a facade of authority. And so the rest is history, as they say. It took several years. I continued to remain a ministerial servant several years before I stepped down from that. I kept researching on the internet, in secret, in private, before I was really finally convinced that there was nothing in the Watchtower organization worth continuing to put faith in. And one of the final straws that really turned me off was the February 15, 2009 Watchtower article called "They Keep Following the Lamb." And that article had actual subheadings called "Jehovah Trusts the Slave" and "The Slave is Trusted by Jesus." And the point of the whole article was that you rank and file Jehovah's Witnesses better trust the slave too. I was still conducting the Watchtower at that time, and it was incredibly painful to conduct, knowing that the entire thing was a lie. But even so, it took another whole year or more to finally get to fade out of the organization for good, because basically I wasn't going to leave without my wife and daughter, without my family. And the story of how we managed to get together and get on the same page is kind of a long one that I'll bring out at another time, because we do want to get to the other great interviews we have tonight. We know that it's not easy to get out of the Watchtower, even alone, but to get out with your whole family, it's a challenge. It's difficult. Now, as I said in the earlier segment that was recorded back in April, I really decided that I wanted to do a talk radio show that was from a secular perspective, because a lot of the discussion groups, a lot of the websites, a lot of the call-in shows and things are from a religious perspective, from a Christian perspective, and I feel like there needed to be something from a secular perspective, because when your criticism of the Watchtower is based on the view that they're doctrinally wrong, for example, that they're wrong about the divinity of Christ or about the rejection of the cross, you're missing what I think is the real issue, which are the Watchtower's violation of those 4 fundamental human rights: the right to complete and truthful information, the right to think and analyze that information autonomously, the right to feel whatever emotions one feels without the fear of repercussions, and the right to choose one's own behavior based upon thoughtful analysis of that complete and truthful information in a way that produces real, positive feelings of friendship and joy and unconditional love. So the Watchtower's biggest crime isn't that they don't believe in the Trinity or some other such religious doctrine. It's the way they violate those 4 basic human rights consistently and persistently as a mechanism to mentally and to an extent physically enslave members of the Jehovah's Witness religion. And this topic really isn't being talked about anywhere else that I could find, and I think it's important to have an avenue to discuss it. So I decided sometime in the middle of April this year to start Cult Free Radio Show, and I actually presented the first show on April 30th. It's interesting, when I was a witness, I would think and plan and not actually do anything unless and until I felt it was ready and perfect. And that's a real stressful way to go through life. And for the time that I've been cult-free, I've been working on living just the opposite. There's a thing in Eastern philosophy called Wu Wei, which is kind of a more intuitive and relaxed way of approaching life. I think a lot of people in Western society hear about it and they feel like, well, that's just being lazy, but it's not that at all. You know, going with the flow, accepting the things that you can't change, understanding the things you can, and following your intuition a little bit more is really working out for me, I think. And even though I still plan each show, I don't stress over how it's going to come out, how I'm going to do things. So I feel like the show is going well, and I have to admit part of it is a catharsis for myself, and even if nobody ever listened, I'd still be stronger and healthier for having done it. And on the other hand, though, I really, really hope that it does help others. I hope that as Cult Free Radio progresses on, it won't just be a channel for me to talk and voice my own thoughts and that's it. I hope it becomes a means of interaction and support and education for others. When a person escapes from a high-control religious group, they remain vulnerable for a period of time, and some people of faith could take advantage of that situation and offer a quick and easy substitute for the Watchtower Society that comes in the form of their own church. But however well-meaning that recruitment might be, it doesn't allow the person to explore and experience what real freedom is. It doesn't allow them the time they need to heal or provide them the tools they need to make their own way free in the world, free from oppressive religious influence. So I hope Cult Free Radio can provide an enlightening avenue for self-understanding and a supportive network for embracing freedom. Now, I don't expect to, of course, bring down the Watchtower Society. It's a multi-billion-dollar international corporation with dozens of branches all over the world, and anyone who thinks he can bring down that organization is fooling himself and misleading other people. I really honestly care far less about the corporation than I do about people. Fact is, people are leaving Jehovah's Witnesses every day, and we can also see from the Watchtower's yearbook reports that the growth in the religion is pretty stagnant in lands with a high standard of education. So the purpose, I think, of Cult Free Radio is twofold. Primarily, it's here to educate and support former witnesses and current witnesses who might be considering leaving. And secondarily, if we can educate potential recruits about the tactics that high-control religions have, like Jehovah's Witnesses, and thereby prevent them from joining, we've accomplished even more. So I don't expect the Watchtower Society to go bankrupt or disappear in our lifetimes. But if the religion stops growing, or if its growth rate falls below even the birth rate at some point over the next few decades, I think we could consider that a victory. But more importantly, if Cult-Free Radio helps somebody who's left the organization through their healing process, if it convinces somebody to embrace freedom of thought and independence of action, their own autonomy, or if it teaches someone who may have been recruited the things that they need to know to save them from joining, then Cult-Free Radio has done its job. So I try not to use the phrase "I believe in" anymore, because there are things that I know or am relatively certain about because of the abundance of evidence and the high degree of likelihood that they're real. For instance, I'm pretty sure I'm saying these words right now and that they're being recorded and that other real people somewhere out there are hearing them. But there are things in the universe with far less evidence and a far lower degree, or sometimes even unknown degree, of likelihood that many people choose to believe in, despite the lack of tangible support. And sometimes those beliefs could be helpful in organizing people into communities who work together and accomplishing things that individually the members wouldn't have been able to achieve. But most of the time, however, it's my opinion that it's more beneficial to create communities around relative certainties rather than around mere beliefs. And something I'm relatively certain about is that there are hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people that have been victims of the Watchtower cult, Jehovah's Witnesses. And I think we all spent enough time waiting on Jehovah to solve our problems while we did relatively little to solve them for ourselves. So as we all become together more and more cult-free, we can shed the shackles of belief and embrace the freedoms that are the right of all intelligent beings. We can heal our damaged hearts, minds, and bodies and work together to help heal one another. So that is Mad Sweeney's testimony for the evening.